Well, hello there, and today we are covering the top 10 GeoGuessr tips for Guatemala. Tip number 1. Guatemala has a unique Google car, and what makes it unique to other countries in South America is its racks that are visible. To separate it from Dominican Republic, all you need to do is check if there's any rubber on the racks, and for Guatemala, there is not. Also, other countries in the Americas will not have the front mirrors visible, so that is another way of separating it from other countries. Tip number 2. It is very common to see fully painted poles in Guatemala, and it is much more common to get them in Guat than the likes of Mexico, for example. Generally, you either get the green or you get the red painted bottoms, and whenever I am split between Mexico or Guatemala and I see red painted poles at the bottom, I always go Guatemala, and it pretty much works every time. Tip number 3. Guatemala has stop signs that say Alto, and when you get Alto, you should either go Mexico or Guatemala. Tip number 4. In Guatemala, you tend to get a thinner yellow road line in the middle of the road. This is not fully reliable for separating it with like other countries in South America like Mexico or Ecuador, but it is far more common to get it in Guatemala than, for example, Mexico. Tip number 5. Big credit to Pando for showing me this meta, and I'll share his Twitch channel in the description. He streams a lot of GeoGuessr. They are just really fun, energetic, and great to watch, and also he's a very nice guy as well, so definitely check it out in your own time. But getting back to the video, we have 2 sets of numbers on these yellow road markers that you tend to get on the sides of the road. The first 3 numbers is how far away you are from the capital. So for example, if it is only 2 digits, you know that you are very close to the capital or close enough. Whereas if it is something like 350, it means you're much further away from the capital itself. The other 3 digits is how many meters you are within that given kilometer away you are from the capital. So this could be actually very useful for pinpointing and getting 5Ks, even when you're not on junction, so keep that in mind. Tip number 6. It is important to know where the coverage is in Guatemala. On the left, we have all the roads that have street view in Guatemala, but if you want to mostly focus on where there isn't coverage, there is a very large section of Guatemala's coverage missing in the far north, the northeast, and the central west. But be aware there are single main roads that go kind of between areas that do not have coverage, so just keep that in mind. My advice is to get a general understanding of where the most coverage is limited, and then learn the single roads in those limited areas highlighted on the right. To have a better understanding of where to plonk in the more urbanized locations, I strongly advise remembering or learning these places that I've circled on this map. Of course, the main 2 cities are highlighted in purple, Guatemala City and Quetzaltenango, but I still highly recommend learning all the blue cities, especially Coban, Flores and Puerto Barrios for the more northern rounds, but it's also good to keep on note of like the small southern lowland coastal villages like Monterrico that also have coverage as well. Here you have a more zoomed in example of where you get all the coverage in the lowlands of South Guatemala, as well as where you get the coverage right on the coastline. And on the right we have the coverage in Guatemala for the far north that leads to Flores and other areas surrounding it. Okay, so on the left again we have like the most northeastern part of Guatemala. That includes Puerto Barrios, and it kind of shows the main road leading to Puerto Barrios having coverage, but you also have that junction where it says Buenos Aires that will eventually lead to Flores as well, so something to keep in mind. And on the right hand side we have the most western coverage in Guatemala, and this just quickly summarizes where you get the main road coverage there. And here is the most eastern, but more like central or southeastern part of Guatemala, where you have a fair amount of road coverage, but there are some roads, as you can tell, that don't have coverage at all. Tip number 7. Guatemala is a very hilly country, but you can also get some very flat parts as well. Generally, the flat parts are in the south lowlands of Guatemala, or you are super far north where you have Flores. But besides these locations, you generally get very mountainous environments, so usually it's most useful when you get the flatter rounds because you can narrow it down a lot easier. Tip number 8. Here is a map of the industries and agricultural industries of Guatemala. And what I would say is the main parts of this map to keep in mind are the orange and yellow sections and maybe a bit of the green section as well. So the orange and green area is where you would find most of the sugarcane. So if you see sugarcane in Guatemala, you should go the lowlands of Guatemala City. I think there's an exception really far northeast, so just be aware of that. That might be a bait ground, so just be careful. Maybe always have one person there just in case you see sugarcane. But generally, sugarcane should be in either the orange and the green on this map. The orange area is also where you should find most of the cattle ranches. So if you see a lot of cattle, you're probably in the more southern parts of Guatemala and you're probably away from the hilly areas. So the yellow is pretty much most of the north, and the main difference between this and the lowlands is that it has more of a forested feel to it. Like it's not as impacted by agricultural use, such as cattle ranching or, for example, sugar canes. But one thing to keep in mind is you can also come across banana plants there, so just be aware of that. And you may find other patterns on this diagram, so feel free to give this a look at your own time and experiment on these methods. I won't say it's a 100% guarantee, but it could be useful for potentially doing some good region guesses just based off flat rural environments in Guatemala. Tip number 9. So a big thanks to Blue for sharing me these findings, and also a big thanks to Pando for confirming the legitimacy and accuracy of the, for example, yellow road lines. So the yellow road lines represent the go-kart. So for Guatemala, you mostly have like these little hints of black caps at the end of each bar, but there is no cap on the back right bar on some of the roads in Guatemala, and most of them seem to be located in the lowlands of Guatemala, so either south of Guatemala City or south of Quetzal Alternago. But you can also get it on the road leading to Puerto Barrios, and there seems to be one next to this lake here as well. And finally, tip number 10. And I'd like to thank Panda again for sharing this meta with me, but more importantly, a big shout out to Liponia for discovering this meta itself. I apologize if I've butchered your name, but this is his discovery, so he deserves all the credit for this tip. Okay, so when you get this green pole and you get this white sticker, you're much more likely going to be the east side of Guatemala City. So it's pretty much everywhere east of the main capital, but you can also get it south of the capital as well, so be aware of that, and southeast. There are some road exceptions on the map, so you won't see it all the time, but when you do see it, you should either be east of the capital or south of the capital. And it kind of covers a wide range all the way to the borders, so just don't think it's like next to the capital. It can be pretty far away as well. But yeah, that is all. Thank you all for watching. Hope this video was useful. The next tip video will be Mexico. And yeah, I will see you next time. Yeah, of course, man.